Yes, Mr. Hill.
Lord Forsyth, could we turn to the issue of screening of blood donations for hepatitis C and the formation of the advisory committee on the virological safety of blood? Could we have on screen, please, PRSE 304664? Thank you, Lawrence. This is a letter written to you, dated the 13th of January 1989, written by Roger Freeman. He was then the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State of the Department of Health, as it then was, despite the letter heading saying that it was still the DHSS. And it's on the topic of the Advisory Committee on the Virological Safety of Blood. Mr. Freeman wrote this: Dear Michael, I attach a paper supporting the formation of a new advisory committee to provide advice to chief medical officers on the virological safety of blood, and on which our officials have consulted. We recently corresponded on the establishment of the new management arrangements for the National Blood Transfusion Service, and it seems timely that blood transfusion services and all other interested parties should act in unison on this important matter. We therefore support these proposals under terms of reference, and I would be grateful for your agreement. This was the subject of a minute that was sent to your private office by Mr. McNiven on the 6th of February 1989. That is at PRSE 301975. We can see the distribution list also includes the Secretary of State's private office, the private offices of the Under-Secretary of State and the Permanent Secretary of the SHHD. It is a short minute. Paragraph 1 says, this recommends that the Minister should agree the proposal in Mr. Roger Freeman's letter of 13th of January. Paragraph 2, Mr. Freeman proposes that a new body should be set up to advise the health departments on the virological safety of blood supply. This is an important issue of increasing significance because of greater public and clinical awareness of the potential for viral contamination, as well as new developments in product liability legislation. Hitherto, the health departments have adopted new screening procedures in an ad hoc fashion in response to advances in clinical knowledge. There is no suitable existing body to give advice on the range of issues spanning several disciplines involved in decisions on virological safety. The proposal is that a new advisory body tasked with advising on measures to minimise virological contamination whilst maintaining adequate supplies should be chaired by the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of the Department of Health and draw members from the Blood Transfusion Service and expert virologists and microbiologists. We were consulted about the proposals in terms of, I think that should be and terms of reference, at an earlier stage. We entirely agree that they are sound. I therefore recommend that the Minister should write to Mr. Freeman supporting the initiative. A draft was attached. And finally, to finish this sequence, PRS 40967, please. A letter dated the 8th of February 1989, sent from you to Mr. Freeman, thanking him for his letter of the 13th of July, and saying this, and I quote, I think it's important that the UK blood transfusion services should act proposal and terms of reference outlined in your letter.
I think we lost a bit of sound there. Just want to repeat that so that those who are watching online can hear it. It was the last paragraph you were reading.
Mr. Forsyth thanked Mr. Freeman for his letter of 13th January.
Yes, we got that bit. It's the last paragraph.
And I quote,
I think it is important.
I think it important that the UK blood transfusion services should act in unison on this subject with the benefit of the best available advice. I therefore agree to the proposals and terms of reference outlined in your letter. Lord Forsyth, why did you think that it was important that a UK-wide approach was taken to this body and this issue?
Well, the first thing is it was important that we had the best possible advice and that we acted on that advice and that it applied to everyone in the United Kingdom, it seemed to me. I thought this was a very sensible proposal. If anything, I suppose, if you wanted to make a criticism, it was, why has it taken this long to do it? But I mean, I thought it was a perfectly routine thing. Our officials have been consulted. They were happy with the terms of reference. They welcomed it. So it was a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Did you have any perspective from being asked to make this decision as to why it hadn't happened earlier?
No. But 89, it may have been, I don't know, you would have to ask the officials who were involved in the discussions. All that's happened here is that the junior minister in the Department of Health has written to me as a junior minister in the Scottish office saying, we want to set up this advisory group. Our officials think it's a good idea. Can you give it your blessing? Incidentally, just make a point about these dates on these letters. You'll see that it says February. It was the practice of, I find it irritating actually, but it was the practice of the department to write in the numbers when the thing was dispatched, and it was quite a long time to reply, from the 13th of January to the 8th of February, but there we are.
It seems that Mr. McNiven's minute was the 6th of February, so the reply went out quite quickly after you'd been informed of it. It took some time to have you informed of it.
Oh, right. In that case, it was Mr. McNiven who took quite a long time to respond, but he probably had more urgent things to do, and this would have been going ahead. I mean, this was just an exchange of letters, and there was no way that I or any other minister was going to disagree with what was clearly a sensible proposal.
Was a consequence of the fact that it was a UK-wide body on a health policy issue that the Department of Health would in effect become the lead department on this matter?
No, it was a consequence. We were setting up an advisory committee that would provide advice on a United Kingdom basis, where Scottish office officials and medical advisors would have an input. I don't think there was any suggestion that the territorial departments would be, because we set up this committee, compelled to accept its advice.
So you would have been equal partners rather than junior partners in this matter?
We might have been smaller, but we never regarded ourselves as junior partners. I mean, Scotland had its own legal system and its own devolved administration. Insofar as this happened, it's a positive thing, because it meant that our people would be represented in discussing issues which, sheer common sense tells you should be looked at on a United Kingdom basis, and the advice should reflect that.
Could we turn, please, to PRSE 40558? This is a minute dated 1st of February 1990, so about a year after that previous exchange. The Advisory Committee on the Virological Safety of Blood first met in April 1989. And this minute, which is from Mr. Tucker and is sent to your private office, concerns specifically the test for hepatitis C and responds to an article in The Guardian. And just for the record, the URN for that article is NHBT 5014_060. What Mr. Tucker wrote is this. This note is to advise the Minister about an article in today's Guardian, copy attached, which seems likely to prompt other media inquiries. Background. The test referred to in the article has been added to a study for non-A, non-B hepatitis, NANB, now referred to as hepatitis C, which was already underway within the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service and the Blood Transfusion Service in England and Wales. Ortho Diagnostic Systems Limited had offered a number of tests free of charge for evaluation purposes. Other countries are also trying the Ortho test, but we understand that it is not in routine use in any country and it does not have a product license in the United States. There is no other comparable test on the market at present. A pilot study has been carried out on volunteer donors in Scotland and England who agreed to have their blood screened for non-A, non-B hepatitis. The samples obtained were also tested using the Ortho Hepatitis C, HPC, kits, and of those, 0.5% to 1% proved positive. Those donors who proved positive are being recalled for medical assessment and further tests to check on the consistency between the tests. Only a minority of those infected with HPC display any symptoms either in the short or long term, as referred to in the third paragraph of The Guardian's front page article. The statement that, quotes, 6,000 people last year may have received blood transfusions contaminated with hepatitis C assumes that 1% of all donations were from donors who are infectious, i.e. not just carriers, and that they passed on the antigen and not just the antibody in their donation. The emphasis placed on this by The Guardian is therefore unnecessarily alarmist. The meeting referred to in the article, which took place on the 23rd of August, was between Ortho and the Director of the National Blood Transfusion Service in England and Wales, Dr. Gunson. Dr. Mitchell, Director of the West of Scotland Blood Transfusion Service, was also present. It was made clear that they were not representing the UK health departments at the meeting. This was one of several discussions with Ortho to obtain further information about the product, such as cost and other practicalities, and also to report results of the pilot study. Current position. There is no meeting involving chief medical officers planned for October, but the Health Department's Committee of Experts on the Virological Safety of Blood, which includes representatives from SHHD and the SNBTS, will be discussing the test as an agenda item at their next regular meeting on the 17th of October. The accuracy of the test has not yet been fully established, and it is felt to be essential to have confirmatory assays to eliminate the possibility of cross-reactivity with other antigens before policies for generalised screening of blood donations are implemented. The cost to the SNBTS of introducing this additional test into routine screening in Scotland is estimated to be in excess of £600,000 per annum. Line to take. If asked to comment, it is suggested that the Minister uses the following. A, donors should not be deterred from giving blood. B, UK blood is still considered one of the safest in the world, and we continue to investigate ways of making it safer still. C, the Ortho test is under review here, as in other countries. D, the prevalence of HPC in the population in this country has not been established, nor has the role of blood in its transmission. E, the UK health departments, along with the UK blood transfusion services, are examining all the available data before making any decisions about generalised testing, and the public will be informed before any such test is routinely introduced. This is a UK issue, and the Department of Health will be taking the lead, but SHHD and SNBTS will be represented in any meeting, and the Minister will be consulted before any decisions are taken. And that is signed by Mr. Tucker on the 23rd of August 1989.
Can I just check the reference for that? It's PRSE 40558.
That's right.
And because I have a note that you dated it the 1st of February 1990.
I'm sorry, I think I turned up the wrong page in my file. Yes, that's right. Yes, my mistake. That is the 23rd of August 1989. It is the next minute, which is 1st of February. I turned up the wrong page, sorry.
So we've yet to move on to the 1st of February 1990. Okay, thanks.
We will get to that minute in a second, I think. But so August 1989 here. Just to give back context again, the Advisory Committee on the Virological Safety of Blood met in April of that year. Now, would you agree that that minute reads like an introductory minute about the issue of hepatitis C screening tests?
I don't know what you mean about an introductory minute. I mean, it's
well,
just...
It doesn't read as if this is a matter which has been the subject of minutes before this. You're being told about it, as it were, for the first time, it seems.
I think it's a minute because there was a piece in The Guardian, not something I would have read, actually, but I think there was a piece in the Guardian, and I think the minute has been done in case I was asked in Parliament or by other press people to comment on it. That's how I read it. And indeed it gives a line to take, which is pretty, doesn't really say very much.
The last paragraph, paragraph 9,
Yeah.
About the the Department of Health, taking the lead and the SHHD and the SNBTS being represented.
Yeah.
Was that how you understood the position to be?
Well, I'm not sure about the position in August 89, but my understanding of the position was that there was a dispute as to the reliability of tests, that the reliability of tests improved, and when all the medics were satisfied that they wouldn't get a lot of false positives, and that the tests were reliable, the policy changed. And we were advised to go ahead accordingly.
The reference there to the Minister being consulted before any decisions are taken.
Yeah.
There is obviously a large decision to be taken at the end of this, which is...
Yeah, I understood that to mean that my officials would consult me before any decisions are taken. That's how I would have read that. That's how I read it now. And that our people would be represented in any meeting, and that clearly it was necessary to proceed on a UK basis. You couldn't decide it was necessary for the quality and the reliability of our blood supplies to do testing in one part of the United Kingdom and argue it wasn't necessary in another part of the United Kingdom unless there were very exceptional circumstances. I think that's all that's saying. Certainly how I would have read it at the time.
Let's go to a minute which is from the 24th of July 1991, so nearly 2 years later, which is the minute which emerges at the end of the discussions within the Advisory Committee on the Virological Safety of Blood, at a time when the decision to introduce hepatitis C testing is being put to ministers, being put specifically to you. You could have PRSE 304608. We can see that this is sent to you, copied to the Secretary of State, other ministers, and the Permanent Secretary of the Home and Health Department. It is again from Mr. Tucker. We look at paragraph 1. It says, this minute is to inform the Minister of a decision by the other UK health departments to approve routine testing of blood donations for the antibody to hepatitis C virus, HCV, from 1st of September 1991, and recommends that similar testing in Scotland should be introduced from that date. There is then a section on the case for screening and the case against screening. The inquiry has already looked at the arguments that were being made there in the context of Baroness Hooper's evidence, so I won't take you through that. If we look to page 2, we can see that an element, some information is given on background. Paragraph 3 states the hepatitis C virus is considered to be the main, though not the only cause of non-A, non-B hepatitis, which is the most common form of post-transfusion hepatitis today. The disease may have run a symptomless course, but in some cases, it can result in chronic liver damage, which may ultimately be fatal. There is also a rare but serious acute form of illness. Paragraph 4 refers to the availability of the development of screening tests from mid-1989. The early tests were said to produce many false positives, and for some time there was no supplementary test to indicate whether the positive cases were infected. Paragraph 5. Despite this, routine testing for Hcv antibodies in all donated blood has been introduced recently in the United States, Japan, 3 Scandinavian countries, and a number of European countries. The UK were advised by experts not to introduce screening until the available tests had been evaluated. Supplementary tests had proved satisfactory, and appropriate arrangements for positive donors were in place. There's been reference to a second-generation test that had been developed by 2 US manufacturers. And it states at the end of paragraph 6, Department of Health have agreed that the arrangements for supplementing tests and counselling of infectious donors should be introduced from the 1st of September 1991. The Scottish position. The SNBTS have been in favour of introducing the test for hepatitis C for some time now, but on the basis that a reliable testing kit can be supplied. In anticipation, that testing will be introduced in 1991 to 1992. PAES bid was lodged and this was successful. SNBTS are in a position to commence testing from the same date of the 1st of September as the rest of the UK. The cost for 1991 to 1992 will be in the region of £700,000, and as indicated above, this has already been included in the CSA allocation. Recommendation. As Department of Health ministers have already agreed to the screening for hepatitis C, there would be criticism if Scotland were not seen to be taking similar action. The testing kit now available is considered by medical experts to be sufficiently sophisticated to give accurate results, and we recommend that the SNBTS should be authorised to begin testing from the 1st of September 1991. No specific publicity is being given by the Department of Health ministers to the introduction of tests in England and Wales. This is probably in view of the current sensitivity surrounding blood transfusions and HIV, and the need to avoid giving an opportunity for further criticism of testing. For further criticism, that testing should have been introduced earlier. It is considered that an announcement may prompt questions about blood safety, and that it would give rise to another pressure group seeking compensation for contracting hepatitis C. If, however, the Minister considers that the balance of advantage lies in assuring the public that all possible steps are being taken in accordance with specific and medical knowledge currently available to ensure the efficacy of blood and blood products, we shall prepare a press release to this effect for the Minister's approval. That is Mr. Tucker's minute of the 24th of July 1991. If we could just turn back to the first page and the first paragraph. The minute doesn't contain any information about when the Department of Health ministers took the decision, but the inquiry knows from other material made available to it that a submission was made to Baroness Hooper in the Department of Health on the 21st of December 1990, so some 7 months before this minute. and that Baroness Hooper indicated her approval of the introduction of hepatitis C tests on the 17th of January 1991. Does it surprise you that you weren't being asked for your view on this matter until the 24th of July 1991?
Well, there's only one answer to that question. Yes, it does surprise me.
Also from that first paragraph, you are being informed that a decision has already been taken by the Department of Health on what you have said is a UK-wide issue where the logic would apply equally north and south of the border. Should you have been informed at the same time as your colleagues in the Department of Health about the fact that a decision was now being requested?
Well, it's hard to answer that question without knowing what the explanation was for it being presented so late. And it's particularly hard given that the same minute indicates that the SNBTS had been in favour of introducing testing for some time. So I don't know what the answer to that question is. I think you would need to ask the officials. As it happened, yeah, go on.
So, as the minister who was receiving this, absent any explanation from the officials, do you think you should have been informed of the need for a decision at the same time as the ministers in the Department of Health?
My understanding was that the delay in going ahead with testing arose because of uncertainty about the efficacy of the tests and their quality, and that the decision to go ahead, which we took, was based on assurances that the medical professionals were now satisfied with the quality of the testing. Now, I don't know if the delay was because there was some disagreement between officials in the Department of Health and the Scottish office or whatever, but as far as I was concerned, if we had an effective test, which would not create lots of false positives and other difficulties, and if the SNBTS were in favour of getting ahead with it, we should. But you're quite right. I mean, this is presented as a fait accompli by the Department of Health, where I certainly had no involvement. It's not clear from that minute what involvement our officials had.
In paragraph 7, if we go over to the page 2, out of fairness to the Department of Health, it does appear that your officials were sufficiently well informed as to put in place preparations in the PES bids to ensure that there was money in place should the testing be required.
Yeah, that doesn't explain the delay, though, does it? Which is the question you asked me, which I can't possibly answer. I mean, who is the minute from?
Mr. Tucker.
Yeah, well, you need to ask Mr. Tucker that question.
The implication of this, what we're looking at on the screen at the moment, is that if the PES bid was successful in 1991-92, would that be for finance during that year, 1991-92?
Yes.
So it was obviously in the anticipation, what one would assume from this, by the SNBTS, that within the year running from 91 to 92, there would have been testing, and that must have come sometime before the bid was lodged. When would it have been lodged?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
What was the date of the minute we're discussing?
24th of July 1991.
24th of July 1991. Okay, so that is. And the date when you say the Department of Health had decided to go ahead with testing was?
17th of January 1991.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the answer to your question is, and I mean, at the end of the day, we did introduce testing, and we were assured that the testing operated, and we had found the funds for it. So I would have been reasonably satisfied by that, but probably not so satisfied with the fact that, yet again, the Department of Health were going ahead and apparently not involving us. But I can't swear to that because I don't know what, you know, the reason why there was that delay. But it didn't make a difference to the effect on the public and the introduction of the testing. The only difference was I insisted on there being a public announcement, and I didn't like the part of the minute that gave reasons why the Department of Health were not inclined to make a public announcement.
We'll come on to that in a second. But there are just a couple of other points that I'd like to pick up. And to be clear, I'm asking you about what your expectation as a minister was, not about the reasons why this took place. It's about when you received these documents and the information that was contained in them.
Yeah, and you're encouraging me to criticise the actions of my officials when I don't know the reason why there was that delay. And I'm not inclined to do that. There may have been a good reason for it.
I'm giving no encouragement. I'm simply asking questions so that you have an opportunity to say what you wish to say.
Okay.
The minutes refers to the date of the 1st of September as being the date that is proposed for testing, but it doesn't contain information that previous dates had been suggested to colleagues in the Department of Health. The original date was not before the 1st of April 1991, and then there was a proposal for the 1st of July 1991. But would you have expected to have been told that the date of the 1st of September was a fallback from previous dates that had slipped?
So it's suggested by whom?
In the papers that we have seen that have gone to the Department of Health ministers, the original date for the proposed introduction was stated to be not before the 1st of April, and then a subsequent date was given the 1st of July 1991, and then finally a date of the 1st of September. You are only told about the last of those dates. My question is, should you have been told about the previous dates as well?
These were dates suggested by officials to ministers in the Department of Health you're talking about?
Yes.
Officials in the Scottish office were not involved in the discussion of these dates, is that right?
They would have been raised at the Advisory Committee on Virological Safety of Blood, but I can't tell you which Scottish office officials would or would not have been aware of them.
Well, what was the reason for the delay from April to September?
The principal reason appears to have been the introduction of the second generation of tests.
Well,
referred to earlier in the minute. So there was a reason.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have expected to be informed of that because, as I understand it, the policy was absolutely clear that we should only introduce testing when we were satisfied that the testing was accurate and effective. And if the delay was because they were still arguing about whether that was the case, no, I wouldn't have expected Minister to be informed because we'd already made clear what the policy should be. Is that right? I think that's right.
Before we get to this final decision about the time has come, we think, say the ACBSB, to introduce the test, there are a number of other areas of discussion about what other countries are doing, about when the Food and Drug Administration of the United States licensed the Hcv tests, and about the extent to which the UK should be conducting its own evaluation of those tests on top of those done elsewhere. I have seen no documents to suggest that you were informed about any of that. Do you have any recollection of being informed about any of those discussions?
No, but I'm not sure I would expect to be. I mean, the chronology may be wrong in my head, but I mean, I thought it was absolutely clear that we were not, although the SNBTS were in favour of introducing testing, it was on the basis that there were reliable tests. So we had to be satisfied, that everyone was satisfied that the tests were reliable. And at that point we would introduce it. And I think you're going to go on to how we then announced that. The only bit of that note that would have caused me concern was the suggestion that we shouldn't make an announcement for the reasons that are given in the note by the Department of Health.
Let's look at your reply to that, which touches upon exactly that point. SCGB 40163_031. This is the 26th of July, so you are replying within 2 days of receiving the minute. You say to Mr. Tucker, on your behalf, Derek Beerhoff, your Assistant Private Secretary, says to Mr. Tucker, Mr. Forsyth is grateful to you for your minute of the 24th of July, in which you recommend that routine testing of blood donations for this antibody is introduced in Scotland from the 1st of September 1991. The Minister is content to endorse your recommendations and considers that a press release is appropriate. I would be grateful if this could be put in hand. So that is you rejecting the approach that was taken by the Department of Health of not putting out a press release and deciding that you would have one. Is that right? Correct.
I don't know whether the Department of Health put out a press release or not, but I thought it was important that we should. And I didn't like the reasons that were being given for not putting out a press release.
I should say the phrase from a previous minute is no specific publicity. That's just correcting myself when I'm talking about press releases.
Yeah, okay.
What was it that you felt that it was necessary for the Scottish office to put out a press release?
Well, I suppose if I put out a press release, it wouldn't just be about the position in Scotland. I thought it was important to have transparency in these matters and to provide reassurance that everything was being done in order to maintain the quality of the blood products. And I think actually, if you go back to Mr. Tucker's minute, I think he, in his minute at the end, he actually makes that point.
What he said was...
Can we go back to PRSE 4608? That's 304608.
30.
PRSE 304608. And it's the second page.
The relevant section, I think, is right at the bottom. If, however, the Minister considers that we go over to the next page, the balance of advantage lies in assuring the public that all possible steps are being taken in accordance with specific and medical knowledge currently available to ensure the efficacy of blood and blood products. We shall prepare a press release to be effect for the Minister's approval.
If you just go back to the previous page. Foot of the page, paragraph 9. The reasons which the Department of Health are giving, these are the reasons you didn't like.
Yeah, it's sorry, I interrupted you.
No.
Yeah. To be fair to the Department of Health, this is Mr. Tucker's speculation on what the reasons are. this is probably in view of the current sensitivity surrounding blood transfusions and HIV, and the need to avoid giving an opportunity for further criticism that testing should have been introduced earlier. It is considered that an announcement may prompt questions about blood safety, and it would give rise to another pressure group seeking compensation for contracting hepatitis C. Now, I did not like, if that was their position, I didn't agree with it. We had a perfectly good argument for why testing was not introduced earlier, and I considered that by not keeping people informed about what we were doing about blood safety, we were more likely to create questions about our commitment to that. And the issue of another pressure group seeking compensation for contracting hepatitis C, there was either a case for that or there wasn't. And making an announcement of this kind, which, as he points out, where the balance of advantage lay, seemed to me to be about reassuring people that we were doing everything we could to ensure that blood and blood products were as safe as we could make them, and that we were operating in a transparent manner. I mean, it's a good rule if you're a minister. If there's an argument about disclosure and non-disclosure, you should always go for disclosure, because if you don't go for disclosure, people will then assume that there was some hidden agenda.
You would face, presumably, allegations of cover-up, potentially.
Yes. If you'll permit me an anecdote, I think when I was Secretary of State, a British oxygen vehicle had gone to one of our nuclear power stations, and one of the valves in delivering, I think, CO2 had found to be defective, and it had then gone on to Barr's iron brew factory, and the assurance was actually it was unlikely that there was any possibility of any contamination, and I think the advice was that we should not actually disclose it, whereas my view was absolutely we should disclose it, and we should explain why there was no risk to the public. Had it not been disclosed, and it had then been leaked to a newspaper or whatever, we would have been absolutely on the back foot by having not disclosed it. I mean, it's just a general rule, well, at least it's a rule that I try to follow as a minister. It's always better to come clean and explain why you've done. Come clean implies that there's something wrong. It's always better to explain why you have, what has gone wrong and what you've done, rather than avoid possible difficult questions arising from the nature of the issue.
Let's turn to the press release. PRSE 40743. Dated the 2nd of September, so the day after the tests were due to be introduced. Additional funding for blood screening. It says this, Mr. Michael Forsyth, Minister of State at the Scottish Office with Responsibility for Health, today announced his approval to routine testing of blood donations for the antibody to hepatitis C virus. The annual cost of the testing will be in the region of £1.2 million, and the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service will be allocated additional funds to cover this. Mr. Forsyth said, blood donations already undergo a series of thorough tests to ensure that they are as safe as possible, but it is only very recently that appropriate technology has become available to reliably allow routine testing for hepatitis C. The additional funding I am making available to the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service will allow this testing to start today throughout Scotland. This will further safeguard the many people who benefit from blood donations, as well as the community at large. And if we just go over to the second page, I don't intend to read through them all. There are some notes for editors there to provide some further background. If we could go back to the first page, please. The words that were contained in the press release are that it was only very recently that appropriate technology has become available. Now,
available, I think you need to read the whole sentence.
Available to reliably, yes, you're quite right. Only very recently that appropriate technology has become available to reliably allow routine testing for hepatitis C. We know that there was a lengthy discussion in the ACVSB about that issue. And we also know that the the Food and Drug Administration in the United States had allowed a license for the use of the first generation of the tests on the 2nd of May 1990. Now, that is not the exact same test that was introduced on the 2nd of September 1991. But knowing, as you do now, that there had been that approval given, are you comfortable with the expression used there, only very recently that appropriate technology has become available to reliably allow routine testing for hepatitis C?
Well, I wouldn't have been comfortable to rely on the judgment of the United States on the reliability of tests or products. I would expect that information to come from our own medical experts. And as the papers that you've made available to me show, this was an issue which the clear advice to ministers was that we would begin testing when there was a reliable test. This press release was drafted by officials, by the I guess by the press office in consultation with our officials, and as you'll see from the notes to editors, reference was made for journalists to go to the SNBDS and others, and I think that was an accurate reflection of what we believed at the time. But I wouldn't have been influenced by what was going on in the United States at all.
Moving to just a couple of final points away from hepatitis C testing. You mentioned earlier your trip to San Francisco. There is a press release dated May 1991, which refers to that as being a recent visit, so sometime around 1991. Do you remember what the purpose of that visit was?
Oh, that's really interesting, because I couldn't remember whether I'd gone as Secretary of State or as the Minister of State. It was 1991, it was as Minister of State. It was about trying to learn. Naively, I had assumed that San Francisco was kind of very liberal and we would be able to learn some lessons from their experience. What I did learn was how tragic the impact of AIDS had been. It was a hugely emotional experience. I mean, I remember visiting rooms where they had made quilts which had all the people who had died of AIDS and who they were, and it was really quite shocking to discover, for example, that they didn't have needle exchanges, whereas I expected that. I also visited on that visit some prisons where I was less than impressed with the way in which they tried to prevent the spread of HIV in prison and to try and control highly risky behavior in the prisons. So it wasn't quite the trip I imagined, but it did actually make me not that I wasn't aware, but it made me realise just how devastating, in my view, not getting things right on HIV could be to the community as a whole and to many young men.
A separate issue, do you remember being asked at all about the possibility of a look-back exercise to identify those who had been infected with hepatitis C through blood and blood products? So that's something that was ever raised with you, to the best of your recollection.
What did that mean? Going back to what did a look-back exercise mean? What did that mean?
It would have involved identifying donors who had given blood whilst who were positive for hepatitis C, and then trying to track back those who had received that blood.
I don't recall being asked specific about that, no, but I could have been. I'm just thinking about I was just thinking about the issues that would raise, because it would mean contacting people who may or may not have been infected with hepatitis C, or who, and depending on the timing, whether there was an effective test, and who may or may not have suffered severe illness. So I guess I would have been guided by the medical advice again on what to do about that, but I don't specifically recall that. And I don't think there was anything in the papers that you sent me about that, was there?
No, there wasn't, yeah, so far as I could tell. You mentioned earlier the Cullen inquiry into the Piper Alpha disaster. Yeah. Do you recall the issue of a possible public inquiry into this disaster being raised with you?
No, I don't. I don't recall that, and it was at what stage? When do you think that might have happened? Because, as far as I was concerned, for most of the time I was there was still unfinished business on the issue of who was entitled to receive compensation or an ex gratia payment.
I've seen no evidence that it was raised with you. It
okay.
was a free recollection question, as it were, as to whether or not you had any memory of that.
I didn't know. And I'm not sure it would be appropriate here to express my views on the efficacy of public inquiries.
Finally, from me, Baroness Hooper, when she gave evidence, said that in her role as Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Health, she would have found it helpful to have been able to meet and speak directly with people who were infected and affected as a result of infected blood, not necessarily with organisations such as the Haemophilia Society, but with individuals themselves. Firstly, did you have an opportunity to have such contacts with those individuals? And secondly, if not, do you think that would have been helpful to you?
Well, there are two questions there. Did you have an opportunity first?
I certainly had an opportunity to meet with people who had not just been infected with HIV, but had developed full-blown AIDS, both in this country and in the United States. I didn't have to. So, yeah. Whether it was a result of them being infected by blood products or for whatever reason, I didn't need to meet any more people to. I mean, even today, to sort of understand how devastating it was. As far as people who've been infected, I mean, some of the papers has got the ministerial correspondence, and also I was a member of the House of Commons, and people like Gavin Strang and others were constantly talking to me about the impact of people who'd been infected with HIV, and because there was no effective cure or remedy, one felt completely powerless, other than to provide. We set up separate AIDS units in our major cities, and we tried to ensure our communications elicited public understanding of the particular tragic position that they were in. But no, I mean, Baroness Hooper was a member of the House of Lords. Now, I'm a member of the House of Lords now, and one of the things that I miss as a constituency MP is you have a constant flow of correspondence, you have your surgeries, you talk to people, you meet families who are affected. One of the things I like about the House of Lords that I don't miss from the House of Commons is in the House of Lords, on the whole, most members have got experience and they're not really worried about upsetting the whips or what they say on particular issues. So I imagine that Baroness Hooper, probably because she didn't have constituency contact, may have felt she could have had more contact with not just people who've been affected, but also their immediate family.
Those are the questions that I have for you, Lord Forsyth. There will now be an opportunity for call participants to raise questions with you.
The way that works is that call participants are entitled through their recognised legal representatives, some of whom will be here in this room, some of whom aren't, to suggest questions to Council to ask you. Plainly, they can't finalise whatever questions they may have in mind until they've heard what you've had to say orally today. So we have to give an opportunity for them to provide those questions to Council. Normally that process takes about half an hour. It may take longer, depends how many questions there are. And after that, we come back and then Council asks those questions. And again, I can't tell you how long it'll be because it depends how many questions there are. But that's what we'll do now. So is half an hour about right, or would you suggest any different time, Mr. Hill?
I would think about half an hour, sir. Thank you.
Very well. Well, we'll take a break then until not before 3:30. I say not before for the sake of accuracy. If for any reason more time is needed, you'll be told. But otherwise, it'll be 3:30. So it's not before 3:30.